Aloha. I'm Paul Norman. I'm the Executive Director of Neighborhood Place of Puna. And I just want to take a few minutes today to talk about um, child abuse and neglect. April is Child Abuse and Neglect Awareness Month, Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month. Um, and it's something that a lot of people like to talk about. It's a difficult topic. Um, And a lot of times when people hear about the work that I do, about the work that Neighborhood Place of Puna does, they ask, well, how can you do this work? And I always find that a very difficult question to respond to because the answer is, how can I not? Right? Which doesn't mean that everybody should do the work, but um, my belief, and this is not a new belief, but that the greatness of a society is really found in how it treats the weakest members, the most innocent members, and children fit that category. So, um, to create a great country, we need to look and see how are we treating the children, because the children build our future. They are our future. Um, and in our community, in our society, in the United States, tremendous amount of wealth, tremendous amount of resources, tremendous amount of skills. And yet, this year, there's something like 13 million children who are food insecure. In other words, that household that they live in does not have enough money to buy sufficient food for the children, consistently have sufficient food for the children. Right here, in Hawaii, where I live, where Neighborhood Place of Puna is located, um, we know that last year, 1/3 of all the individuals experiencing homelessness were children. And we know that a large percentage of those children were between the ages of 0 and 5, which, as I've said before, is a very developmentally important age range for children. Um, And so if when we talk about preventing child abuse and neglect, there is so much that we can't do and so much pain and suffering that, is out of our control. But what is in our control is making sure that children have basic resources, that making sure that all children have access to sufficient food and sufficient nutritious food, not the cheapest food that you can buy, not all of the junk basically in the store. That children have a home. They have a stable home, very basic. And we need to really work on destigmatizing the this idea of getting help as parents. Long history of that, um, a lot of shame around asking for help, and which is rightly so, because our society shames people who ask for help, who aren't seen as being proper parents, whether that's true or not. And so we need to really get over that and make sure that there are resources, consistent, stable resources to help parents and to help children, especially the most vulnerable, especially the children um, who don't have enough, who grew up in families where they're just getting by. There is no safety net because they don't have the resources. I mean, that's the way it works in America, right? Is in America, your safety net are your financial resources. I know there's a lot of garbage talk out there about um, the social welfare state, and there's some programs, right? There's definitely some programs, but not enough. right? If there were enough programs, there would be no children suffering from hunger. If there were enough programs, there would be no children experiencing homelessness, right? And those are the things we can do about it. I'm not even talking about the resources that need to be brought to bear to help children who are being physically abused or sexually abused or neglected in very egregious ways. That's a whole nother set of resources which are consistently underfunded, right? They're children. I mean, we see it at our shelter all the time. We see parents. Last year, 25% of the parents, 25% of the heads of households, even so, not both parents, just the heads of household, um, of parents of families that came through our shelter, 25% of them came out of the foster care system, right? Those are children that we failed as children, and now we're failing again as adults because they obviously don't have the skills to build a life, which is seems pretty understandable considering what they're coming from. Because if you were in foster care, you know something very bad happened to that child, right? It's contrary to popular belief, children just don't get removed for little stuff. The child has to be at imminent risk of harm. And even then, sometimes it's hard. So if a child has been removed, they are traumatized. They are, I don't want to say it, I mean, they're damaged in some way and they could heal with resources and support, but they are broken. And then for them to find themselves homeless at 23, 24, 25, whatever that is, that's telling us that we are failing those children. Oh, we are failing the most severely hurt children, the most vulnerable children at a fundamental level. And yes, we cannot, because of the way our society is structured, the history around the view, how we have viewed society for viewed children for thousands of years is basically property. And I mean, really, we've only started to recognize child abuse as a thing um, until not until very recently. I think the Society for the Prevention of the Prevention of Cruelty to Children was formed in 1870 something, right? That tells you something that the folks who founded first the Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals later founded the one to prevent cruelty to children. So at that time, animals had more protections than children. And then really, as far as preventing child abuse and neglect, I mean, really, it didn't start. We didn't really start getting a centralized response until the late 1960s and early 1970s, right? 50 years, basically. So, um, you know, when we talk about preventing child abuse and neglect, right? Because that's what this is about. So there's a lot of things out of our control, but there are things we can do. So first of all, if you suspect a child is being abused or neglected, report it. Just report it. Trained professionals here in Hawaii, there are trained professionals who do investigation and take a look and see, right? You can do it anonymously. So if you suspect it, report it. Generally, even there's a myth that children lie about these things, exaggerate these things. It's a myth. All right. Generally, children are telling you what's happening to them. So report it. Okay. So that's one thing you can for sure do. Um, the other things that you can do is really work at all levels, at your local level, the county level, the city level, whatever level that is, state level, federal level, to increase resources and supports for families and children. Really? That's saying a lot, but it's really that simple. It's not going to, just because every child is housed and fed, which would be great, um, it's not necessarily going to end child abuse and neglect, but it's going to reduce it. Right? If every child is housed, they're much more likely to be in school. Right? And when they're in school, they're interacting with other adults, they're interacting with other children, so they get support, they get social supports, but they also have people who are seeing them and seeing how they're doing and can intervene if they're being abused by a family member, or which is usually the case. Usually it's happening in the family. If you make sure the children have enough food, so their brain and their bodies will develop properly, they'll be more successful in school, they're more likely to be successful as adults. And if you make sure that there are enough mental health and physical health services for families and children, the children will be healthier, right? Really basic stuff. Expensive when you look at it national. I mean, expensive in a relative sense, right? Because the long-term cost is the society we built, right? We neglect children. We deprive families of sufficient housing. We deprive children of sufficient food. As a society, we become weaker. That's the reality, right? And then, finally, care. Care about what's going on with the families and people around you. Right? It's very easy to close our hearts. It's very easy to turn away from suffering. Right? Natural, it's like it's kind of a defense mechanism. But creating a caring society involves having people who care. So there is no excuse for child abuse, right? Children don't deserve to be beaten or hurt, right? It doesn't matter what race they are, what language they speak, whether they're developmentally delayed, whether they're acting out or whatever it is, no child deserves that, right? And if you don't believe that, do the research, because that's the truth. And then once you know that in your heart, share that. Help the other people in your community to see that. Help the members of your church or your social group or your club or wherever it is, the people you see that. Don't let them get away with accepting cruelty or abuse or neglect of children. It's just not acceptable. Children are defenseless. Children depend upon us as adults for help, for protection, for sustenance, right? Easy. Children are easy, right? I mean, not having children, raising children is hard, but opening your heart to the needs of children is easy. I think that's one of the reasons that the whole situation on the southern border is so challenging. Children are suffering. We know they're suffering. We know that is wrong. Very hard to figure that out. But we can't stop trying. And the same thing when it comes to child abuse and neglect. We have to do better. We have to end hunger in our community. We have to end child homelessness, family homelessness. We just have to. As a society, we have to do that. And if we do, we will be a stronger society. So in the meantime, you do what you can, right? Neighborhood Place of Puna exists to help families. We're there as a resource for families who live in East Hawaii and in particular in Puna. We make sure that if families need basic supplies, diapers, formula, clothing, hygiene supplies, whatever that is, counseling, whatever it is, we connect them with those resources, or we give them those resources, whatever it takes, right? They want to become better parents, we can help them with that. If they need help with their finances or job skills training, we can help them with that. If they're homeless or at risk of homelessness, we can help them with that. That's what we do, right? But we, Neighborhood Place Puna, can't do it alone, and social service agencies can't do it alone. Ending child abuse and neglect is a societal change. And in my mind, it really starts with a commitment to make sure we meet the needs of the basic needs of children, right? Enough to eat, a safe place to live, and be surrounded by stable, loving adults, right? So I say it every time. I'm going to say it again right now, is that, you know, we're working together to create a society, create a community in which every child grows up in a safe, stable, and loving home. So do what you can, because together we can end child abuse and neglect. Aloha, and have a wonderful week.